All right. Thanks, John. This is an outline of what I'm going to talk about today. We're going to start with the North Platte Basin. We'll look at snowpack and reservoir conditions in that basin. Then we'll go to the South Platte Basin and again look at snowpack and reservoir conditions. And we'll finish by looking at Lake McConaughey conditions, the inflows and the storage. So we're going to start with the North Platte Basin. This is a graph of the snowpack above Seminole Reservoir in Wyoming. Seminole Reservoir is the furthest upstream reservoir on the North Platte system. On this graph, that black line you see is the average snowpack. The red line you see is last year's snowpack, and the green line is this year. So you can see snowpack is well below average for this time of year. However, you can see snowpack typically doesn't peak till mid-April, so we still got about 2.5 months for the snow to accumulate. A good example of what can happen is if we look back at last year's snowpack, for the most of the year up till February, we're trending right around average. And once we get to February, they got a large snowfall event, and this line jumped about 3 inches just from that one event. So if we were to get something similar to that, that could put the this year's snowpack up around the average line. This is a snowpack above Glendale Reservoir. Glendale Reservoir is the largest, or is the furthest downstream large reservoir on the North Platte system in Wyoming. Again, on this graph, the black line is the average. The red line's last year's snowpack, and green line's this year. Same story with the snowpack above Glendale, well below average for this time of year, and about half of what we were this time last year. This is a map of Wyoming showing snowpack as percentage of normal for each basin in the state. If we look down here at the lower right-hand corner, you see the upper North Platte's 76% of normal, and the lower North Platte's only 68% of normal. If we look clear down here in the bottom right, there's a small portion of the South Platte Basin that extends into Wyoming, and it's currently only 18% of normal. If we look at the state as a whole, the entire state of Wyoming snowpack is below average for this time of year. This is a teacup diagram showing all the reservoirs on the North Platte system in Wyoming. Those red circled numbers are the amount of water needed to fill each one of those reservoirs. So about 440,000 acre feet to fill Seminole Reservoir, 456,000 to fill Pathfinder, 140,000 to fill Glendale, and another 30,000 to fill Guernsey. If we add all those together, we come up with about 1,065,000 acre feet to fill the North Platte reservoirs in Wyoming. From a report put out by the Bureau, their annual North Platte water supply outlook, they put it out monthly. The last month, their statistical expected inflow was only 550,000, and their statistical maximum inflow was 835,000. So even if they were to get their statistical maximum inflow of 835,000, that would still not fill the reservoirs in Wyoming. This is a screenshot from an NRCS report they put out monthly. This is the January report. We'll ignore this Sweetwater Basin here. If we look at the upper North Platte Basin here and go clear to the right, we can see storage as percent of average. On the far right is last year's storage as percent of average. So last year, the upper North Platte River Basin was 145% of average. This time of year, currently it's 107% of average. And then if we look down here at the lower North Platte Basin and this basin-wide total, these bottom lines here, we can see last year reservoirs were 140% of average, and currently they're 114% of average. If we compare the actual current storage with last year's storage, we find that there's 442,000 acre feet of less water in those reservoirs than there was last year. That's equivalent to almost 16 feet in Lake McConaughey. So although there's a lot less water in storage this year than last year, the storage is still above average for all these reservoirs. So that's the good news. Now we'll switch over to the South Platte Basin. This is a graph of the snowpack in the South Platte Basin in Colorado. This purple line you see up here is the maximum snowpack. This red line is the minimum snowpack. That green line you see in the center, that would be your median snowpack. The gold line that's just above that is last year's snowpack, and the black line is this year's snowpack. So you can see that we still have the same story here in the South Platte, well below average for this time of year. And in fact, that red shaded portion you see, that's the bottom 10%. So we're actually in the worst of the 10% snowpack years. This is a map of Colorado showing snow water equivalent as percent of normal. We're just concerned up here with this one, the South Platte Basin, currently 74% of average. And kind of like Wyoming, most of the state is below average for this time of year. This is another screenshot of that NRCS monthly report showing reservoir conditions. We won't look at any reservoir in particular, but if we look clear down here at the bottom, second line from the bottom, the basin-wide totals. Clear over here to the right shows storage as percent of average. So last year, those reservoirs were 117% of average. Currently only 87% of average. If we compare the actual storage to last year's storage, there's 215,000 acre feet less water in storage in Colorado on the South Platte system than there was last year. So that's equivalent to about 8 feet in Lake McConaughey. Now we'll talk about Lake McConaughey. This is a graph of Lake McConaughey inflows. That black line you see there is our average inflows from 2007 to 2020. That blue line is last year's inflows. You can see first half of the year above average almost every day. And then we got a nice little spill event from Wyoming. That's this spike in inflows here. And as soon as that spill event ended, we were below average for the remainder of the year. That red line is this year's inflows so far. You can see inflows this year have been below average almost every day so far this year. This is a graph of Lake McConaughey elevations going back to summer of 2012. You can see here on the right, this large drawdown we had last summer, about 20 feet of drawdown. That's the largest drawdown on this entire graph. And then you can see where we've rebounded to today, currently about 69.9% of capacity. But if you look back, the last time we were this low and the lake was late 2014, maybe early 2015. So takeaways from today, the North Platte Basin, well below average snowpack, but above average reservoir storage. About the only good news out of this entire presentation. However, a spill from Wyoming is very unlikely at this point. South Platte Basin, well below average snowpack and below average reservoir storage. And Lake McConaughey, below average inflows so far this year, and currently about 70% of capacity. So even though all this looks like bad news, Central's doing everything we can to conserve water in Lake McConaughey. Since irrigation season ended last year, we've only been releasing water to meet our minimum FERC diversion requirements. So during the non-irrigation season, we have requirements to have so much water passing or flowing at our diversion, and we've only been releasing enough water to meet those flows. In addition, for the upcoming irrigation season, we only plan on releasing water for irrigation. We're not going to release any extra water for power. That's all I have. Is there any questions?
Any questions coming out online? The releases, do those fluctuate? I'm assuming that's for the birds or whatever. Does that fluctuate in a dry year? Is that fixed even in a dry year?
Our non-irrigation requirements are based on reservoir conditions. So the higher the reservoir is, the higher our release requirements. limits are. So right now we're in a dry period. There's a very wet condition, a wet condition, a transitional condition, a dry and a very dry condition. And we're in the dry right now. Yes, our releases are lower than they could be.
Okay, good question. Anything else? If not, thank you very much, Todd.